Hello, and welcome to Greatest Work, a podcast where we discuss textual connections within the Book of Mormon to the gathering of Israel and small and simple ways that we can gather Israel every day. Today, we are so fortunate to have a guest on our podcast. Her name is Nicole Clark, and she joins us from Popcorn Tree Books, and she's actually my cousin. So I've known her for a very long time, and I'm so excited that she's joined us and to highlight all the amazing work that she's doing with Popcorn Tree Books and helping children to have great picture books that they can use to learn and know the gospel. So we'll go ahead and get into it and learn about the story. How did Popcorn Tree Books come to be, and how did you interested in like starting picture books and writing them, and tell us all about it.
Yeah, great question. So Popcorn Tree Books has been officially around for about a year and a half now, but I feel like the kind of the foundation or the underpinning for this project, this business has been going on for quite a while. So I'll kind of start with where we are now and then I'll give a little background. So Popcorn Tree Books is a small publishing imprint dedicated to creating picture books for Latter-day Saint families. And so I've always loved to read. Reading's always been a really important part of my life. I have a lot of memories of reading as a kid and as a teenager as well. I studied elementary education at BYU, which was so fun in part because I got to take classes where I had to read picture books. And what a fun homework assignment that was to have to go to the library and read picture books. And
Sounds like
I
a great major to me. I always
yeah,
like thought I got to the my college career. I was like, man, pick the wrong major.
yeah, it was so fun. And I one of the classes that I really loved the most that really I feel like kind of rekindled this love of picture books that I think I've kind of always had was a children's literature class where we had to analyze picture books and we really kind of dove into what made some picture books more effective than others and how do the illustrations and the text and everything all work together to tell the story. And so I feel like I kind of came at it from just the, you know, bibliophile angle, the loving to read kind of part of me, but also kind of having this academic side of really getting into the research on reading and what happens in kids' brains when they read and what happens with families when they read. So fast forward a little bit, I was really excited when my kids were born to get lots of books and have lots of books in our home and kind of create this family culture around reading. And when they were really little and kind of in the board book phase, it was pretty easy for me to find board books that incorporated our faith in Jesus Christ and kind of included the gospel learning and teaching that we were doing at home and at church. But once they moved past the board book phase, I wanted to keep that going. Just like we had books in our home about trucks and cars and animals and teddy bears or whatever. I thought this is a really important part of my life, my faith in Jesus Christ and our beliefs about him. And so, of course, why would I not incorporate that into the reading that I do? But it was really hard to find picture books that were well, it was really hard to find picture books at all that were for a Latter-day Saint audience specifically. And then once you kind of found those very few, I was honestly kind of disappointed with a lot of them. They were either really outdated or kind of preachy, like overly didactic, so they weren't really very fun to read, or the illustrations weren't that great, or there was just all kinds of things, and it kind of bummed me out. Like I was really disappointed about like I wanted to have this joyful reading experience and I wanted it to be fun. I didn't want to have to feel like every time I opened up a religious picture book, it was like, let's sit down now, children, and talk about faith, right? Like, no,
And
it could
just do it
be
for something with your kids that you were like so deeply involved in.
yeah, exactly. Just to incorporate it into our life. And so for quite a while, I just lamented this and thought, man, when is somebody going to solve this problem, you know? And I started this list of like, if I were to ever, be the boss of the Latter-day Saint picture book world, these are all these books that I would write. And I would read other just secular books that were really good and think, wow, that could be like that this kind of concept could translate really well into this specific gospel topic or principle or whatever. So I had this huge list, and finally I just kind of decided, you know what? I'm not going to wait around anymore. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this happen. And so that's I guess the long version of how we came to decide, yes, let's do it. Let's create these books, the books that we wish we had for our children.
Was there a specific like impromptu moment that caused you to switch from like now I'm gonna do it?
That's a good question.
It's a lot of
Specific,
work to, I mean, everything you've done, like starting a business, writing the books, contacting all the
yeah. I don't
publishers.
remember a specific moment, but I do remember a specific book that I was finally like, I think I could do this. We have a book that fired our first book that we published that I thought we could do this, and I knew of somebody who I felt like could illustrate it. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to make a little book dummy, which is like a, you know, kind of sketch it out, make it into a little mini kind of practice book. And as soon as I did that, it was like, okay, yeah, let's just try it. Let's just try it and see what happens and see where it goes. And here we are. So.
That's great. And so, as you've been working on this, what are some of the key themes that you really focus on in your books?
So I think one of the things that we try to do is blend truths about the gospel and doctrinal principles with things that are going well in the secular picture book world. Because I think that we really want to, our mission is to really help families to incorporate the gospel of Jesus Christ into their everyday reading, right? We want these kind of books that we're making to be the books that kids pull off a shelf, you know, at an afternoon and say, hey, let's read this book. Or like, hey, go pick 3 bedtime stories. And these are the ones that they pick. And if the books that we're making aren't joyful and exciting, A, kids are not going to want to read them, right? And B, parents are going to keep them stuffed in their church bag. And it's going to be used as a like, oh, you're being too loud during sacrament meeting. Here, read this book. And now there's nothing wrong with using books in sacrament meeting, right? That's, you know, every family has their own thing. But we kind of had this vision of let's make books that are so good and so faith-filled that kids and adults want to read them together, and that they're not the kind of book that, you know, you as the parent are kind of like suffering through, like, oh my gosh, like I can't, let me skip a couple of pages because I can't wait till this book is over. So I guess themes specifically, we have one book that's out, and then we have two two and a half other books that are coming this year. I don't know if you wanted me to talk specifically about the themes of those books or
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
themes. Well, yeah, so the first book that we have out is called A Great Calm. It tells the story of Jesus Christ calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee, but it does it in a really unique way. So the whole book only has, I think, 31 words, and they're all either onomatopoeia, so sound words, or short little phrases from the King James Version of the Bible. So it really creates this kind of immersive effect. The book is really wide. It's almost like a cinematic kind of view. There's these big, rich illustrations that go all the way to the edge of the page. And really, it gets kids kind of immersed in this story so they can feel the drama and the excitement and the fear that the disciples had as they're kind of going through this storm. And then the peace that Jesus Christ brings at the end when he calms the storm. So so that's definitely, I think the theme of this one I would say is peace and finding peace through Jesus Christ.
And what's so interesting to me about this book is like the automatopoeia and how the words represent the story and what's going on with the pictures. And it's so interesting from the parent perspective too, reading it, where you're like, wow, this is only like these very simple words from this big story, but it's this book and it's a comprehensive book with these very short words. So it's like very intellectually engaging as a parent.
Yeah, it is, but it's also simple enough that a kid can read it. You know, once they've read it once or twice, they can read the whole book and understand what's going on. And I think having not so many words leaves a lot of room for conversation between the parent and the child because there's kind of some gaps there. And so
Oh, yeah.
the text and the illustrations and the parent-child relationship kind of all have to work together to tell the story, which I think makes it really unique.
I didn't think about that, but that's what happened when we read the book.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and your other, did you want to talk about your other books?
Yeah, sure. So the next one that we have coming out, I have a proof of the cover of that one. The next that we have coming out is a book about the temple, and it's called Welcome to the Temple, A Walk Through the House of the Lord. And this book, we are so, so, so excited about this book. It's the
I'm
first
excited for
book
it too.
ever. Yeah, it's the first book ever that shows kids the inside of the temple. And so we've kind of designed it to be almost like a temple open house in a book. So each page you open up the book, and each spread, which is kind of the two pages next to each other, each spread has an illustration that depicts one of the rooms of the temple, and there's a brief description of kind of what happens there, if there are any ordinances or covenants that happen, it's described. And other little details that you can kind of read if you have older kids or if your kids are asking questions. And we're really excited about this one as well because we've tried to really make the focus of this book Jesus Christ and how the temple points us to him, and how covenants and ordinances are about our relationship with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. That's something that I feel like church leaders, the prophets and apostles, and other general leaders have really been emphasizing. And so we've tried to take that counsel and really incorporate it into this book so that families can have more natural conversations about the temple from the time their kids are very young, just in everyday conversation. And it doesn't have to be something that's saved for, I'm going there someday kind of thing.
Yeah, covenants have been really big in the last recent general conferences. And I'm really excited for this book because I think Elder Bednar has talked about how the temple preparation classes are in our homes. And that, like you said, it starts now. And even Elder, I think it was Elder Suarez in the last conference, he talked about a primary teacher. He's like, considered his primary class is a temple preparation class.
Yeah, yeah, I know which talk you're talking about from Elder Bednar, and it's such a
We'll
good
link it in
one.
the show notes.
Yes, he talks so much about how like there's more that we should be saying and that we can be saying, and that our children will have a better experience when they go to the temple, the more that we talk about it. So, and I think this will also be a really great resource for families. I live in Pennsylvania, for those of you who are listening who don't know this. I live in Pennsylvania, and my kids have never been to a temple open house because we're not in Utah where there's temple open houses all the time. And so this is really great, I think, both for people who live where there's not a lot of opportunities for temple open houses, but also to help prepare your kids to go to a temple open house. I think this is a really great way to kind of preview what they're going to see, what they're going to experience. And then to have this book afterward for them to be able to remember and reflect, I think it will just help kids deepen their temple open house experience.
Wow, that's great. And I think on the church media, there's a few pictures here and there of, different temples of what in the interior, but you have to go and purposely search for them. And I think this will be a great resource for kids and families to have it all there together.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And I think some people might be thinking like, well, I could show my kid, the Rome, Italy temple open house or the Washington, D.C. There are videos that the church has produced of these temple open houses and showing. But the thing that I think makes this book different and unique and worth having, even with those videos available, is that your kid can't or probably shouldn't, or you don't want them to, be just getting on your computer and looking up a video anytime they want to. But what they can do is if you have this book on your shelf, right, anytime they see it or anytime they think about the temple or have a question, they can go pull that out and flip through it, even if they can't read, to just look at the pictures and start a conversation. And so I think one of the things that I think is really beneficial about gospel-centered picture books and religious picture books is that they provide that accessibility to kids, right? Your young kids, especially pre-readers, can't just go and think, oh, I have this question about the scriptures, about the gospel. I'm gonna go grab my scriptures and look it up in the topical guide. They can't do that. They can't read and they can't find that out for themselves. I've compared kids before to like the people who lived in Martin Luther's time, when the Bible wasn't translated into well, they couldn't read anyway, but it wasn't in a language they could read. And so the people had to kind of, rely on going to church and hearing people read it to them. And that's part of what Martin Luther's work was. But our kids are kind of like that too, especially our young kids. And so I think picture books are a really amazing resource to provide access to the gospel that they might not have in other ways.
And like you said earlier, in a format they're already used to, where they're already reading other picture books.
Right, right. Yeah, they already have those skills and that it's comfortable for them.
Okay, so we kind of on the surface mention it, but let's explicitly mention how does your work with creating these beautifully designed picture books for Latter-day Saint families help to contribute to the gathering of Israel?
Yeah, I think like you said, we've kind of mentioned a couple of things at a surface level. I think everybody who's been on your podcast, I'm sure, has mentioned President Nelson's quote about anytime you do anything to help anyone, right? And so I think that applies here too, right? But I think just this idea of helping, I think sometimes we think about gathering Israel, even when we think about it as, anytime you help anyone do anything, as like something I have to plan out or think about, which is like, yes, you should. You should definitely make plans to gather Israel and do it intentionally. I'm not saying like, oh, just hope that opportunities come your way. But also, I think that what we're trying to create here is opportunities that happen naturally in your home. And so increasing the number of just natural conversations that are happening in your home. I think kids are really neat because they don't they don't think about their lives as segmented as we as adults do, right? We think, okay, now I'm working, now I'm relaxing, now I'm doing my calling, now I'm whatever. Right? We kind of put things in these little boxes, and for kids it's kind of like it's all one and the same. And so I think we can really take advantage of that and learn from that as adults, that kids don't think of like, oh, this is like I can't ask a church question right now because like we're not having come follow me family time or whatever. Like they don't think about it like that. And so I think we can use that to our advantage to have these kind of conversations more often when we have these kind of resources that support that. And so I think what we're trying to do to help gather Israel is make it so that it's something that occurs more naturally in your everyday life and everyday conversations.
That's great. I know we've talked about this about how like teaching kids the gospel and how they're just kind of, sponges. They just do it all the time. And I think that's a great example for us that we covenant to always remember Jesus Christ. It's a good example for our kids. They just kind of do it all the time. They, like you said, they don't segment off different parts, and then that's something that we can actually learn from our kids about. And our books are a great example that we can, by having these conversations, that can open their minds up to want to make covenants, and
Yeah.
talking about that will help it too.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say too, this is one of the books that I haven't mentioned yet that we have coming out this Christmas. We have a family Advent book coming out. It's kind of a story a day format through the Book of Mormon. And so each of the 25 stories is about a person or a group of people in the Book of Mormon who looked forward to the Savior's coming. And so I guess the reason that I bring that up here is that the Book of Mormon is kind of the big tool, the big prophesied tool of the gathering. And so we're really excited about this specific project and how it will help people, families, kids, adults, teenagers, to see the Book of Mormon in a new way and experience the Book of Mormon in a different way. That I think kind of contributes to that vision that prophets have had for a long time of how the Book of Mormon will help aid in the gathering.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that's huge, and people will love this. And that, like, Book of Mormon is really central. And it's so amazing to me this year as we're doing Come Follow Me, just to I can see, wow, how much the Book of Mormon mentioned the people and their covenant with God and their promises about lands and blessings and posterity. And it's the gathering of Israel is all over the Book of Mormon. And so being able to take that unique approach during Christmas time and really dive into the Book of Mormon, we traditionally think about the Bible. I think that'll be a really neat experience.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. And I know that just me working on this project, I've really gained it's helped me to read the Book of Mormon in a very different way, kind of through this different lens. And so I'm excited to share that with families. So
Yeah. And so along with that, what have you learned in your own faith journey of this process of popcorn tree books and creating these books?
right, yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just remembering over and over again. This is not new, and we all kind of know this intuitively, but that things that are simple and things that are profound can coexist, right? The gospel can be complex, but it can also be distilled into some really simple truths, and that doesn't lessen their power or their impact. Um, I think it's been really interesting for me, particularly well, I guess with all of the books that we've done, really. But I was thinking about the Temple book and this Book of Mormon Advent book specifically, to kind of take these really big, really sacred, really just important topics and think, how can I communicate this to children in a way that preserves the sanctity and the beauty and the richness of this topic, but also presents it in a way that kids can understand and connect with. And so it's really forced me to have to do a lot of study. I think maybe if you've never, written a children's book before, particularly a gospel-centered one, you think, oh, well, you just kind of take your Sunday school lesson and cut out a third of the words and there you go. But I feel like I've really had to actually deepen my study and my understanding of all of these topics so that I could communicate them in a way that would make sense and would have that same effect on my kids, right? Because just just dumbing it down isn't going to work either, right? I have to think about how can I help them see how big and amazing this is in a way that they can still understand it. So I've learned a lot about the gospel on a much higher level than I would even say to my kids, but to try to get all of that behind this simple message, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's amazing how much goes in and to see how the gospel is, like you said, simple and profound. That's a great testimony right there. But can you share more about that creative process for people who love your books and who may be unfamiliar with everything it takes to produce one of these books?
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking. It's a huge project. I think I kind of knew going into it that it was going to be big, and I'm still I'm still realizing, like, every time we go to make a book, I'm like, oh man, yeah, I kind of just forgot how much of a big deal this is. I will say that the timeline is really long. People are usually surprised to find out how long it takes us to produce a book from like start to finish. Coming up with the idea is usually the easy part. It's the rest of it that takes a long time. So it usually takes us about 2 years to produce a book. And it starts with me, all of the books that we have produced up until this point and kind of for the foreseeable future are books that I have written. And so it starts with me coming up with a concept or an idea. Sometimes that's inspired by another book that I've read. Sometimes it's inspired by something my kids have said or something that I've read in the scriptures. But then one of the tricky things about picture books is that they are for both kids and parents. Then I have to consider that there's kind of two audiences that we're writing for here. We have the parents or grandparents who are buying the book and who will be reading it, but also the kids who will be reading it. And so it's a little bit of a tricky balance to balance both of those two, because you could have a book that kids absolutely love, but if parents either hate it or aren't interested, like they're not going to buy it, they're not going to read it. So I kind of have to think through what's the best way to present this topic or this concept. And sometimes that comes along with the idea, like sometimes that all kind of comes together. But then also considering, like, in 2 years from now, are people still going to want this? Because it's going to take 2 years for, to get from idea to actually having the book in print. So then once that happens, then I start writing a draft of the book. And depending on the book, sometimes that's like takes one draft, sometimes it takes lots and lots of drafts. And as I'm writing, I'm kind of thinking about, how do I present this in a way that is engaging, that's doctrinally accurate, and how am I going to incorporate this with the illustrations? One of the big things about picture books is that if the text tells the whole story, then there's nothing for the illustrations to do. And so I kind of have to leave room for, what part of the illustration is going to play. So then once
And are
I've
you talking with the illustrator during this process or
Not
after?
yet. Yeah,
Okay.
not at this point. Yeah. So once I get the text where I feel like I'm in a good place, I send it to be edited the first time. And the first round of editing kind of looks at the concept as a whole and kind of the big picture. And then I get that back from my editor. Sometimes there's more changes that I need to make after that. But usually after that point is when I contact an illustrator. I'm looking for an illustrator. All of our illustrators, we choose our members of the Restored Church just because I feel like in order for them to effectively communicate and understand what we're trying to communicate, they need to have that shared background. And so I kind of look through illustrators' work and try to find someone whose style matches with the style that we're kind of going for with the book overall, or who has experience in those kind of illustrations. So for example, with our temple book, this illustrator, I had seen some work that she had done kind of on her. She was living in Tokyo, I think, at the time when the Tokyo temple was being rededicated. So she had done some stuff with art for the Tokyo temple, little booklet she had made. Anyway, so I was like, okay, she can do temples, like that's what we need. So once we contact an illustrator, we have a contract with them, they start working on the illustration. So I'll provide them with, says what we're looking for and what we want. And, they get the text. We collaborate. Usually they start with giving us sketches. And then once the sketches are approved, then they kind of move on to, color and then to final, finished illustrations, I guess. So then we have finished text and finished illustration. The text usually goes through one more edit to kind of really get into the nitty gritty, sentence by sentence, how are things working and what's the grammar and the voice and all of that. And then we send it over to a
And
graphic
that's a
designer.
third round of editing.
second or
Okay.
third, kind of depending on the project. Then it goes to a graphic designer or a layout designer. And this is the person who kind of takes the illustrations and the text and puts them all together, gets them all lined up. And they actually have a really important job. I feel like that sounds really easy to just be like, oh, just like stick some text on there. Things like font selection and color selection and size all plays a really big part into kind of the feel and the experience that you have when you're reading it. And so they have a really important job of kind of making it all come together. So we collaborate with them. After everything is all on the page and it's starting to come together, then we send it for one last edit. And this is like the proofread, so that this editor makes sure that there's no little typos that sneaked in, no, funky things that were missed in previous rounds of editing. And then we have final files.
And are those all different editors or all the same editor?
Sometimes some of the rounds are done by the same editor. Usually the first round or two is done by a different editor than the last round or two, depending on
Okay.
how many rounds we have. But yeah, different people. Which is really good because then you have, multiple kind of looking over the same thing to
Yeah.
minimize the chance of errors. And then you have the scariest part of the process, which is sending it off to be printed. And once you do that, like there's nothing you can do. If you decide you changed your mind about something or you wanted to say something differently, like it's done and you have 1,000 copies being printed across the ocean. And so that's the terrifying part.
Is this self-publishing or you're working with publishing companies?
So we publish them ourselves through Popcorn Tree Books
Okay.
as the publisher. Then they print them. They usually send us a proof, which is kind of like some sample pages, a sample cover for us to just make sure everything looks good and colors are looking good and all that. And then 8 to 12 weeks later, we get a shipment of a couple 100 pounds of books delivered to our house. And then we get to do the fun part, which is getting them out to people who are interested in having them in their homes. So
And do they arrive on a pallet?
yeah, they do. There's always a nice, delivery driver who pulls them up our driveway and gets them into our garage for us. And then we have a bunch of boxes to bring into the house. Right now, my office is on the second floor of our house, so that's a fun day to bring all of these boxes, 700 pounds of books upstairs. But yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. It was personally very fascinating and to see all the work and there's just the whole process of all the people that are involved and everything that goes into making these amazing books.
Yeah, yeah, it is definitely a team effort and a collaboration.
And so, how can people support you with Popcorn Tree Book?
Yeah, we have an Instagram account that we share a lot of these kind of behind the scenes things and just more insights into kind of incorporating gospel centered picture books into your home. So that's at popcorn.tree.books.
I'll link
And
it
then we
here.
also have a website, which is popcorntreebooks.com, and that's where our books are sold. So right now, the only one on there right now is A Great Calm, which, definitely check out. Then we have two more that'll be coming out this fall. So the Temple book, and then also a church history. We didn't even get to talk about that one. Church history book, which is going to be really great. And then that Advent will be an ebook, and that'll be coming out like November, December, because it'll be a December kind of a seasonal one. So people can access that through the website and Instagram. Those are the best places to hang out.
Perfect. That'll be really exciting. Our last question for you that we ask all our guests is what can you do this week to help gather Israel?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's really and I happened to know that this question was coming, so I got to think about it a little bit. And the thing that I thought of was something that we were already kind of thinking about doing. We have a neighbor across the street that we're really good friends with. Again, I'm not in Utah, so my neighbors are all not members of the Restored Church, which is great. We love that. And this is a neighbor we've gotten to know really well. He's a friend, older gentleman. He's probably in his 60s. He's having surgery on Saturday, and so he loves brownies. We're gonna bring him some brownies. And that probably seems like, what does that have to do with gathering Israel? But I think for this man, just having a relationship and a friendship with us, he knows that we go to, we've invited him to the primary program or whatever. And he's like, oh no, I don't do church, whatever. Just like, we're not offended by that. That's totally fine. But just having a relationship with him that's positive and that shows him just what it's like to interact with people who are disciples of Christ is that's what we're doing. So we're bringing our neighbor brownies on Saturday.
I love that. I love that because it's so simple. It's just brownies, but living out your role as a disciple of Christ, showing others what that means.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't always have to be like brownies with a side of Jesus, you know? Like I don't have to come and be like, I'm here as a disciple of Jesus Christ to gather Israel when I'm going to give you these brownies, you know? Like he would probably be like, whatever. But I've seen it's been so interesting to watch with this neighbor in particular. Like we at Christmas time we did caroling. We went over to his house and my kids sang Silent Night to him. And he like every time we have seen him since Christmas, it's now August, he says like, oh, when you guys came and did that singing, like that was so amazing. Like that was so cool and so special. So whatever. And like that's been such a big deal for him. And so I think just having a relationship with people, that's what Jesus like. I think being a covenant disciple is all about relationships, right? It's about a relationship with God, a relationship with other people. And so developing those kind of relationships is gathering Israel, whether it's Jesus-y or not. So
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. And we hope that you enjoy this episode of The Greatest Work and learning about how we can gather Israel in small and simple ways, and that you go check out Popcorn Tree Books.
thanks again, Christina.
You're welcome. See you next time.